Our next presentation will be by Serban Cornea, and I have a small quotation from him as well. In one of his lectures or videos, he mentioned that instead of coming up with an image, how the houses should look like, I think that it is much more important that the houses should solve problems. And I believe your presentation is going to be about this idea. And maybe you can just extend it with the Aikido relevance as well. Thank you.
I'll do my best. Thank you, Eva. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk about building communities today. Well, Eva was very kind to, in her presentation, to call me a designer. It's, of course, a very nice word, but from my own experience, in my own practice, I think that the role of the architect and the position of the architect today as a practitioner is slightly different and more complex. What you have to do basically is very much about mitigating and having a kind of a mediator role in between a huge amount of interests which are not always convergent. So in order to do the best out of it, you have to have this kind of user-focused design. This is what we have, what we're calling our work. And it's very much about trying to find out how, by which means to canalize the social energy of the different stakeholders in the city. So this is one of the main focus areas we're having. We're trying to find ways of uniting sustainability kind of in its broader sense, because it's here to stay with us for a very long time from now on. But we're trying to merge it with the DNA of the users. And we do this because we believe that change is kind of, it's important to have kind of a vision, but you cannot accomplish it without acknowledging change as an instrument to get there. With other words, it's very much about acknowledging the fact that the welfare state as we know it today cannot exist anymore, only based by state subventions. It's kind of a construction which is not working, and I would say that I would argue that the iceberg is perhaps a much more precise representation of our current situation, where we keep talking about what's up there, which is the city, whereas we should rather kind of turn the focus towards what's under the surface of the water. It's the unseen mass, which is actually making the city happen and keeping it floating. And it makes it happen in such a way that what we're talking about is this kind of huge amount of stakeholders and their interests. It's very much about, in order to make the city happen, to make a sustainable city, we have to find out how to organize and how to orchestrate the interaction in between these different groups of interests. This is very much what we're trying to do in our projects in different ways. Now, it's very much about saying that every kind of interaction and every kind of exchange in between the users, in between the stakeholders, in between those who are actually doing the city through their actions has an impact on the city. And the impact is sometimes very visible. It's very much about partaking in the different aspects of the city, connecting different points, connecting different activities, but it's also very much about being inside or outside. And what's holding the city together, this is something which you can already find in the ancient drawings of Rome. This continuous network of public spaces is very much about the fact that the use of the city and the use of the public spaces has changed dramatically and is changing constantly. So what we have to ask ourselves is how can we understand these dynamics and how can we incorporate them so that we use them in a proactive way to create the city which is alive. So it's not very much about exclusion, it's about inclusion and about participation. One of the first cities we did, one of the first projects we did in Copenhagen was a kind of a strange assignment we got. We were asked to design a park, but there was nobody there. The edges you see now, which are fully built, were not there when we started up, when we got the assignment. So we had to ask ourselves, how do you deal with this situation? How do you make a public space for somebody who's not there? It's kind of a strange. We didn't feel that the approach to start drawing some very nice curved pathways would be the correct way. So for this reason, we made a different strategy, which was very much about saying that we were going to use the speech bubbles as kind of a tool to structure the dialogue, but also to kind of provide a means of creating public space à la carte. So what happened was that from the moment when we got the assignment until the whole economy of the project was set, and we were ready to kind of start the detailing phase, 2,000 people had moved to the area. So in this way, we could actually use this kind of decentralized strategy to talk to them and to organize different groups of interests. And in this way, by means of kind of an IKEA catalog, organize these kind of different islands, which are very different, and the difference actually also reflects the different interests, the different needs, and also the different dreams of the inhabitants. It's not kind of a fixed or ready design. It's something which is evolving. We have been adding new spaces since 2008. So it's very much kind of an organic growth which is reflecting at every moment kind of a frozen kind of time section about specific needs. Another assignment which was quite interesting, it's more about the building. It's a public building. We also started up working back in 2010. It's coming up now, and actually the interesting thing about it was the fact that it's an extension of a school, but it's also a sports and cultural center, starting up with, again, understanding the fact that the municipality uses currently an amount of money which is around 500,000 kroners per year to move the kids in buses to different locations because they don't have a gym, they don't have a sports hall nearby. But what happens is that when the bus stops and the doors open, all the kids run inside, and the first to be inside start up playing. Of course, it's the guys. They start playing football, so all the rest have to wait because there's not space enough. So it's very much about how to divide the floor when you want to have several activities. That was one starting point. Another one, which was perhaps even more interesting, was the fact that the municipality, the place where this house is being built now, is a place which is very known. It's actually the strongest kind of municipality in Denmark in terms of martial arts, sports. So we were lucky enough to get on board when we started up the project, 25 different user groups representing all the different clubs, club associations, theater school, you name it, whatever, the handicapped kids, the kindergartens, they were all there. So we started up kind of developing the project, and it turned out into a spiral, which is very much about saying that dividing the floor into 4 different floors provides, of course, a possibility of multiplying the activities, offsetting them in this way, creates this very interesting space, which is kind of 4 different steps, like 1 level high, which are spiraling all the way up, creating this kind of common space. So you are always on your own territory. You can see up and down. It has a more intensive kind of usage of the footprint, because inside the steps, there are all the backup facilities, closed spaces, changing rooms, and club rooms as well. So what is interesting is that this gives the possibility to have this kind of interconnected spaces, which is very much about providing exchange, both inside but also outside, because from the building, as opposed to the typical kind of gym, you have beautiful views of the surroundings, and in the same time, some of the facades are also accessible. So the building does something for the society around it. It's not only kind of standing there, it's actually acting. It has a role to play. When we're talking, we have been looking today together with Eva at a number of beautiful sites, very inspiring, and it's also very much about this kind of inheritage. I mean, we always inherit something. We never start up from scratch, or very seldom. Even in the park project, we actually didn't start from scratch. We got some kind of a very, very bad earth inherited from the building site, so we were not able to plant the trees. So there's always some kind of issue you have to deal with. In Copenhagen, we have this site, which is also very beautiful. It's the old abattoir, the old slaughterhouses, which is in the southern harbor. It used to be a closed site for the public. So it used to be a production site until 2007, when we were asked to make a master plan for its development, because the politicians in the municipality wanted to turn it into public space, accessible. So the first thing we said was that, of course, we didn't want to make a master plan for the whole area. The area was already in the process of transformation, so we were not interested into interfering with that. We were interested much more into how to find ways of triggering a positive process to welcome both newcomers, but in the same time also making sure that the existing professions on the site would be able to stay there. So this was one of the success criteria, trying to mix as much as possible existing and new, and structuring the public spaces and the interventions according to a logic of flows and interconnections, but in the same time letting all the rest of the area to rebalance itself from within. So this was actually an interesting project. It took some time, and it's still ongoing. It's not ready yet, but it turned out a success, actually a big success, because now it's on the kind of the mental map of the average Copenhagener. Nobody knew about it before, so now it's all kind of things going on inside, like new restaurants, bars opening, organic food markets, a number of different events. Cultural activities, art. So you could almost say that it's drowning within its own success. So at this stage, it needs kind of a next step. So what to do with it? Obviously, the site is quite big. It's 5 hectares, and there's no investments to develop it further. In the same time, a part of it, which is the white part you see here, is also a national heritage. It's buildings from the 30s. So yeah, how to deal with it? We put forward a new proposal, which is a little bit more radical, which is about adding program, because we believe that the sites of the city, even though they might be a part of the national heritage, they should not be transformed into museums. So it's very important to kind of find a means of balancing in between doing changes in a smart way. What we have proposed was kind of adding 65,000 square meters in a kind of acupuncture way by transforming the city into a vertical food city. So instead of making it into a Tivoli, which is very much what the direction it has now, it's more culture, more events, more things going on. We would like to turn it into a site which is a part of the city, integrated. But in the same time with a twist. So the twist is very much about reinventing it within its own kind of logic of production. So there's nothing wrong with having public spaces which are both productive but also recreational. What is interesting is if we can manage to create a lively urban environment where you can retrofit all the roofs, you can start up gathering the water, you can use the water inside the towers, you can use the tops of the towers to make like a small San Gimignano, respecting the maximum building heights of Copenhagen, which are not very high, but in the same time starting to create this kind of exchange in between inside and outside, using all the flat roofs to provide 260 allotment gardens, which go for like 1 million kroners each in Copenhagen today. So it's very much about trying to start up, seeing at the history, looking at the history in new ways. So instead of having this kind of linear development, it's much more about trying to start thinking cyclicity, reuse, getting the basis, adding 7,000 square meters to the existing fabric to support the retail part, but in the same time supporting also the restaurants, but with food produced on site. What is very interesting is that besides the production part, which I don't want to kind of dwell very much at, which means that you're actually able to produce a city which is self-sufficient with vegetables and fruit, very much as with the numbers which are recommended by the Danish Ministry of Health. The very interesting aspect behind it is really the possibility of combining living with leisure and production. And what you get out of it is this kind of extremely interesting and, I believe, appealing way of having a livable city again, where things are not kind of subdivided into small segregated areas, but they're kind of much more a whole. You can use the rooftops to start up getting the schools there, to get kids up there, to start up having bees. So all of a sudden you get this kind of new public space, which is very different compared to our average idea about what a public spaces can or should be. So again, the question is, how can we improve? We really need very aggressively to ask ourselves again and again, how can we do something better in better ways? Can we use? You are now facing. I have been learning this afternoon. You're having this kind of huge window of opportunity because you are in the middle of a huge development phase. In the same time, you have huge potential here. But the question is how to deal with it. Can we? What should we ask the public space to do for us, and what should the buildings perform? Can we have more generous public areas integrated with leisure? Can we have different spaces for meeting? How can we build and still meet the financial and economical needs we have to meet, but in the same time just giving this kind of extra in order to reinvent the city? Could we, for example, imagine that not everything which is being built has to have this kind of a permanent character? Or could we imagine that what we build should, as kind of a premise for existing, be asked to provide us with the support of temporary activities? So could we kind of think about the exchange in between temporary and permanent in a different way as kind of a dynamic of growth for the city, so that we can start up having like shared economies in between what's there permanently and what's only temporary? And how can we think about this kind of space of interaction and exchange? This is kind of a master plan we just like delivered 3 weeks ago for a very small community. It's of course much smaller than Budapest. It's on an island of Bornholm in Denmark. It's only having like 1,500 residents, but they receive for 4 days each year 120,000 people coming there for a political festival, which is hugely popular in Denmark. So the question is, how can we use these 4 days to make the city grow? And of course, when we start asking the questions this way, we start up coming up with different types of interventions. Some are more radical than others, but they all work with the same goal of providing something kind of a win-win situation for everybody. This means that everything you do there should support the people's meeting, and the people's meeting should be using the city. So it's kind of an exchange again. Very many of the problems we have today, or we are discussing, and we will discuss also later on, are due to the fact that we are kind of stuck. The models which are being used are outdated, so we need to kind of think differently. Again, the experience economy, which is very much about what all of us actually also expect from a city. We expect from the city to be fun, to be amazing, to be intriguing. So how can we imagine that we have like summer houses on the water with fish production and with the production of seaweed? Can we unite these things again in order to be able to create new types of communities which allow us to access sites which are natural environments without destroying them? It needs a different approach. I have a couple of highlights with me today from one of the projects we did last year, where actually Peter was also part of it. It was a big project we did for a foundation and the Danish Center for Architecture, together with 4 ministries and 10 municipalities who were involved in the project. And well, the basic question of the project was, or the premise of the project was, how can we achieve a CO2 neutral kind of future in 2050? So this is why it's called Decade 2050. It's Denmark in 2050. And how will this impact on our cities? So of course it started up with a number of very, very many questions in terms of where does the energy come from, how can we produce enough, what kind of cities are we going to live in, what kind of typologies are we going to live in, how are we going to commute? Commuting is important, as we can see, the traffic problems due to commuting. How big can the big cities become? And what will happen to the countryside if everybody moves to the city? So very many ifs. The project structure was very much started up by acknowledging the fact that, of course, we have very many uncertainties. We know that we all like to eat good and we had to have fun or whatever, and we like sites for leisure and development or whatever. We also expect the things to be accessible, to be easy to deal with, but we also have a number of things we don't know very much about. And what is interesting is, in terms of predicting the future, nobody can do that, but we can at least make scenarios. And scenarios is a way of thinking strategically and creating or providing a framework for discussion and decision making. So the basis of this project was organized around the matrix of uncertainty, we called it. So it's very much about saying, well, how will be society in 2050? What are we not sure about, and which are the parameters which might have most impact in terms of how the society will look like? And how can we then, based on this, make decisions to take us into one direction or another one? So the 2 axes of uncertainties here are very much about the difference in between a society which is very based on the individual, or very much based on the collective. So this is the horizontal axis. Very much collective related, or very much focused on the individual. The other axis is also quite interesting because it's very much about how does politics and green technology interact. Is there a big support? Do the politicians support the green technology and the green transformation? Very much or very little? So around these axes, what you get these kind of 4 different, a matrix of 4 different scenarios. What is interesting again about it is that it actually shows that you get 4 different futures. They have different degree of performativity in terms of green development. So the first one is, of course, 100% green. And the worst scenario is 40. So this is kind of an instrument for decision making, because where do we want to get from here? Do we want to reach the 100, or the 80, or the 40? 40 is very much about status quo. We don't do anything. We just like do as we used to. And another interesting thing about it is, of course, you can see there's a traffic, but there's also lifestyles, but there's also geographies. So decisions have impact on the cities. And what is interesting here is that they also have impact on what kind of geography Denmark will become in 2050. Will it become a very kind of a centralized area, like a ring, or will it become more like kind of a star thing going on, like a Milky Way, or will we only be a comet where everybody sucks, like Copenhagen sucks everything, and all the rest of the country becomes kind of a black hole? There's nobody there. Everybody has shut down the light and moved to Copenhagen, or will it be like very much like it is today, where we have like kind of 2 regional tendencies, one connected in an axis east, moving towards Germany. On the western part and the eastern part, it's this kind of urban region of Copenhagen, the metropolitan Copenhagen, connected to the Øresund and Sweden on the other side. So what this shows is, again, that when we talk about urban development, we're talking about the waterfront, but waterfront is about infrastructure and cars coming from outside the city as well. So we have to think regional. So what is very important to understand is that it's a matter of scales today. Thinking city is a matter of thinking the building within the regional context and vice versa. Because the regions are here, are now the primary engines of change, or they can be, if they act wisely. So it's very much about how do the regions kind of collaborate to each other? How do they do exchanges so that they can reinforce each other instead of weakening each other? So it's again a matter of collaboration at a different scale. But in the best of the worlds, as architects, we have to kind of put forward visions and insist on putting forward visions until we manage to realize them. So in the best of the worlds, what could happen? It could happen that we could have much more of something we know works, like public-private partnerships. Could this be a way of transforming cities, like the old bridge in Middelvaart, which is kind of not being used anymore? Can it be transformed into a hotel, which is also producing energy for the Dong, which is like the biggest energy kind of company in Denmark, to reboost the city as a clean tech area, which again can reboost the development of the lagoon as kind of a barrier against floods. So can we start to put things together in kind of smart ways to achieve kind of, again, this kind of win-win situation for everybody? What about infrastructure? You know, in Copenhagen we're biking a lot. But it's not enough, because it's not only a matter of biking. It's really not only a matter of adding bikes to bikes. What is interesting about the bike problem, of course, it's an individual means of transportation. It's green, it's healthy, and it's fun. But it becomes interesting in a broader perspective only if it works together with the public transportation system and together with the rest of the city. What happens? Imagine all the Tivoli, which is this kind of hugely popular central kind of park in the very, very center of Copenhagen, just near just opposite the town hall. If you could bike over it instead of biking around it, this would just like reinscribe this territory within the public network of the city, where you don't have to pay a ticket to be there, which is also expensive, by the way. A new urban experience. So we have this amazing, very, very beautiful building in Copenhagen, which is the main train station. But we're having a problem now, which is so acute that even when putting radical solutions like this one forward, we get the attention of the CEO of the Danish railway system. And the problem I'm talking about is the fact that we are now, as we're speaking, having 15,000 people crossing that space on a daily basis, right? So in 2018, the building and the main train station will be connected to the metro city ring in Copenhagen. It's coming. So the numbers are frightening to look at what will happen then, and what will happen in terms of the biking and the bike transportation, and how are we going to deal with this? What to do about it? Because right now, currently, it's impossible to park your bike nearby. In the same time, you know, the best way of improving public transportation is by making sure that people have the possibility to switch. So it's very much about intermodality. So this proposal is very much about saying, well, if we can get the bikes, can we get the bikes inside the train station so that it's the shortest kind of amount of time lapse to get down to your train? And it's possible. We can stack 4,000 bikes inside. We have plenty of space. We can more than double the amount of retail space so that we have some economy to work with. And it's actually quite easy. Adding ramps, getting up on top of the existing shopping center, and using the free height, which is unused now, to stack things on top. From there, getting just the elevators, extending the elevators, the existing elevators only one level up, and then from there, leaving your bike and getting down and moving away. So it's very much about trying to see, well, what can we do? How can we do it better? Can we do it better in terms of the cities? Because the cities in ancient times, we had this kind of a different understanding of production. Like the food production was a part of our lives. But then we decided that we didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore, so it should be industrialized, so we threw it out of the cities. And today, well, we're talking about the green cities, but how can we make the cities green? Well, we can make it green if we start to look at, again, at cycles of things where you can move products and byproducts. You can start working with water in cycles. You can start working with manure and all these kind of things. All these things, so organic recycling, all the things which are there already, but they're kind of not moved today. They're not used. Can we do this? Can we think that our cities don't have to look the way they are today? That they can be much more green. So that the greenery is right around the corner. You're actually living in a green city. You're not living nearby a park, but you're living in a park. Can we imagine that the landscapes we do are as attractive as the cities themselves? Can we take this thinking again from a very regional perspective or from a large-scale perspective down to the level of the community and look at how to understand and how to provide shared spaces of exchange in between the houses, which is a project we're currently working on, in order to produce fuel-vibrant communities. I believe that this is, as far as I'm concerned, the secret recipe I think each city should use in terms of future urban development. Thank you.